everybody. We're going to get started. Donna, do you want to begin, please?
Thank you for joining us today for the launch of a new resource from American Cochlear Implant Alliance for the hearing loss and cochlear implant communities. I'm Donna Sorkin. I'm the executive director of the organization. With Tuesday Talks, we want to expand our support to adults with hearing loss, parents, and other family members, and anyone who's interested in these important topics. And we're thrilled that you're here to help us launch it. I want to acknowledge the work of our staff who did the heavy lifting for this series, Nicole Weston, Laura Dotto, and Jessica Hoke, and for the inspiration that was provided by the members of our Cochlear Implant Consumer Network. And I'm honored right now to introduce our moderators for today, Sherilyn Adler and Melissa Chaikof. Both women are parents of adult children who were born deaf and received cochlear implants at an early age. And remarkably, after all the work they did with their own children, they continue to contribute importantly by sharing their knowledge and their experience with others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donna. I'm Sherilyn Adler. I want to welcome everyone to the first ACI Alliance Tuesday Talk. This webinar is being recorded, and I am co-hosting today with Melissa Chaikof. We are both involved in ACI Alliance, as Donna said, as parents of adult children with cochlear implants and as advocates for families. Melissa is the parent of 2 adult daughters who received cochlear implants as toddlers and communicate well using listening and spoken language. She lives in Boston, where she works as the head of the Usher 1F collaborative to find a cure for Usher syndrome type 1F. I am a developmental psychologist and educator based in South Florida. Like Melissa, I've been active in the hearing loss community for what seems like forever, and have a 26-year-old son who just celebrated his 25th cochlear implant anniversary. I currently serve as the executive director of Earpiece Save Your Hearing Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating young people about the epidemic of noise-induced hearing loss and its prevention. Tuesday Talk is a part of an exciting new series for parents, adults with hearing loss, family members, and others interested in hearing loss and cochlear implants. As members of a new ACI Alliance network, CICAN or Cochlear Implant Consumer Advocacy Network, we are honored and excited to launch this new resource. We hope you learn from it and also consider getting involved in the work of ACI Alliance. More on that in just a minute. Next slide.
Hi, so I'm Melissa Chaikof, and I want to first review the technology and go over the Zoom settings that will help you. To access live captioning, first click Settings in the navigation panel at the top of the screen. And under the Meetings tab, verify live captioning should be enabled. I can see it here, so you should as well. If not, toggle to enable it. To ask a question, use the chat box and type it in. We'll answer all questions at the end of the presentation.
Next slide. So what is ACI Alliance? Celebrating the 10-year anniversary of its founding, American Cochlear Implant Alliance is unique as an organization as it's focused on cochlear implants across the care continuum. We have 2,000 members, clinicians, including audiologists, physicians, speech pathologists, psychologists, and others on implant teams, teachers of children with hearing loss, students, adults with or exploring cochlear implants, parents of children with hearing loss, other family members, military members and veterans, and other advocates. We were started because it was felt that cochlear implants fell through the cracks at other general organizations, and we wanted to focus attention on cochlear implant issues and access to CIs. The mission of the ACI Alliance is to encourage and support research on candidacy, broad impacts of cochlear implants on children and adults, and improve delivery of cochlear implant services. We want to advance awarenesses of best practices to a broad audience, including primary care doctors and other health professionals, early interventionists, educators, policymakers, payers, and the general public. We're also interested in advocacy, educating and encouraging policymakers and payers to improve cochlear implant access. Next slide.
So as Sherilyn already mentioned, ACI Alliance's newest advocacy network is CI-CAN, the Cochlear Implant Consumer Advocacy Network for adult consumers and family members of recipients, including parents, and aimed at enhancing and enlarging the broader advocacy efforts with firsthand knowledge of cochlear implants. Personal stories make the difference in positively impacting decision makers and adds credibility to our contacts with state and federal representatives on key issues. If you're interested in learning more, please let us know in the chat box, and an ACI Alliance staff member will follow up later. Next slide. We also wanted to share a few of the ACI Alliance website resources that are available. Stories by parents, adult recipients and veterans, insurance, webinars, best practices for adults and children, the ACI Alliance blog on adult rehabilitation, what is a cochlear implant, and steps to a cochlear implant. Next slide.
And now we are delighted to introduce our featured speaker today, our inaugural speaker. Valerie James Abbott is an active parent advocate and champion for early hearing detection and intervention programs and family support organizations. She is also an award-winning author. Her debut book, Padapillo, was published in 2021 and is based on her family's experience with pediatric hearing loss. Valerie is a frequent guest lecturer at colleges and universities around the country, educating and informing the next generation of speech, language, and hearing professionals and early childhood development specialists about the importance of ongoing hearing health monitoring and the effects of unidentified hearing loss. She serves as co-chair of the Virginia Early Hearing Detection and Intervention Advisory Committee and is co-founder of National Late Onset Hearing Loss Awareness Week, held May 4th through 10th. Valerie lives in Virginia with her husband and 2 children, and we want to welcome her now. All yours, Valerie.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome and the invitation. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, I've been really excited to share our family story with you and to share what our family is trying to build. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our family's experience with pediatric hearing loss that happened after birth, the signs that we overlooked, and the struggles that we faced as a family, and then ultimately how we eventually felt inspired to look beyond our family and to seek ways to improve identification rates and outcomes for children who experience postnatal hearing loss and acquire it later on in life. So with that, we'll get started. Next slide. So our story begins with Bridget. And if any of these slides are not ready yet, you could just let me know. Bridget, who we call Bridie. Bridie is the Irish nickname for Bridget, and she was born in 2005. She passed her newborn hearing screen. She was a very large, healthy, hungry baby. And the only really thing to note about her infancy was that bringing her into the world, her actual birthday story was traumatic. And so for a while, we assumed that her hearing loss was attributed to how she came into the world and some of the decisions that we made that day. But other than that, she passed her newborn hearing screen. We went on and brought her home, and everything was really fine. We had no reason to think that there was anything genetic in the background. We had no reason to think that we should be looking for anything. So just like many parents, we brought her home and just enjoyed her. Next slide. So we were also not first-time parents. When Bridie came into the picture, Mary Claire, her older sister, was 3.5. Her early years were very uneventful in terms of medically and academically. The other thing I'll mention is that Mary Claire, her older sister, was a natural born leader, and Bridie was a natural born follower. And that made things easy because really anything that Mary Claire wanted to do, Bridie was happy to do it. We, at the time, started with a nanny. I was working part-time, and so we decided to enroll her older sister in preschool and keep Bridie as a small child at home with a nanny part-time. And Mary Claire was obsessed with her little sister. Again, very normal several months of bringing her into the world. Next slide. So as Bridie got older and went from infancy to toddlerhood, she continued to be very healthy, very active, chatty. She babbled a lot. She was very engaged in everything that was going on. She was always on the move. She had zero fear of strangers or big dogs or loud noises. What we did not notice was that it was sometime during this period that her hearing status was changing. And obviously she was too young to say anything, to mention anything to us. And I wonder if she didn't even notice herself. She had never been sick. She had never run a fever. Even from this time frame, very, very healthy child. She had never had an ear infection. She had never been exposed to any loud noises or any head trauma or any medications that were of note. Very, very healthy child. So we had no reason to suspect that something was changing with her hearing status at this point in her life. So we just continued on just as we had with her older sister. And that was just to survive each day as a family of 4. Next slide. So at 2.5, she started preschool. And it was the same preschool where her older sister had gone, very, very well-known preschool here in the Richmond area. We started her in September, and we expected her to have a normal year. We sent her older sister off to kindergarten. I went back into the office. My husband was working, and we started that school year the way probably millions of people across the United States did, which was just, let's just survive each day. Next slide. But it was shortly after Christmas that someone noticed something, and someone noticed something was off. It was halfway through the school year. I would say this was about January or February, when we already had a parent-teacher conference on the calendar, as did all of the other parents in that classroom. And we had no reason to think that there would be anything other than the typical stuff. When we walked in and we sat in those little chairs, which why on earth do they make parents sit in these little chairs? I will never know. But we sat in these little chairs and we were expecting things like, she's not very good at sharing or, please stop sending chocolate in with her lunch. We were expecting things like that. But instead, her preschool teacher, just right out of the gate, asked if we were concerned about her speech. And we said, no, not really. And she said that she was concerned. She asked if we found her difficult to understand. And we said, sure, sometimes, but that's pretty normal for a child who's 2.5 years old. And she described to us what she was seeing. And what she said was, when it comes to children this age, that they as a group will all start kind of in a maybe a little bit of a different place, but that they all migrate language-wise together during the course of the year. And Bridie was not moving with the class. Her language skills and her communication skills were not improving. And so I said, okay, maybe she has a speech impediment or a speech issue. Okay, fine. But then she pointed out some other things. She mentioned that Bridie did not know her colors. And I said, oh, she knows her colors. And she said, no, actually, she doesn't know her colors. If you say, go get the red fire engine, she'll go get the fire engine. But if you ask her what color it is, it's green. Everything is green. And so I thought, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. The other thing she said was that she has been unable to sit still during circle time. So when the time of day comes that all the children sit in a circle for a story or some kind of activity, she is unable to sit still. And again, I was like, okay, this is fine. What do you think we should do? And she asked if we would consider having an evaluation done by early intervention, giving them a call for a speech delay is what we started. And I said, okay, fine. So I gave them a call. Next slide. So what happened at this point was early intervention came really quickly. I'm still surprised at how quickly they came. I think it was within 10 days. And I felt it was more of an interview, almost kind of an observation of how we were going about our lives at home. I did not think this would be a big deal. I sent my husband off to work. I sent my daughter off to school. I took the day off of work, and we just kind of were with these people in our home for a bit. And eventually what happened was the early intervention person in our home said, I would like you to do something for me. She said, can you ask Bridie to go get 3 things out of her room that she can safely get and bring them to you? And I said, sure. And she said, so go tell her, 3 things she can safely get by herself in her room and bring them to you. I said, sure. So I said, Bridie, come close to mommy. Come close to mommy. That's right. Bridie, can you go to your room? Bridie, can you go to your room and get your hat and your gloves and your scarf? Because after this, we're going to go outside. Can you get your gloves and your hat and your scarf? She ran to her room and she got the things back, and she brought them to me, and the early intervention person said, wonderful, that's great. She's taking all these notes. And then she said, can you ask her to get something out of the kitchen, but this time don't use your hands? And I thought, okay, what? Okay. So I said, Bridie, come close to mommy. That's right, come close to mommy. Can you go to the kitchen, get a spoon? Can you go to the kitchen, get a spoon, and bring it to mommy? So she went to the kitchen. She brought me a spoon, and the woman wrote down, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And then she took Bridie and she put her in the corner of our living room, facing the corner with her back to us. And she gave her some toys to play with. And I believe they were Legos. And the woman sat next to me on the sofa, and I'm still kind of not sure what's going on. And she took out a bell. And in my memory, it was a bell that was similar to the kind you see in a church handbell choir, a long handle. And she took it out of her bag and she started to ring it. And Bridie didn't turn around. And then she took out another bell and she started to ring that one. And there was no acknowledgement that anything was going on. And it was at that point, as you can imagine, that I completely fell apart. I was a hot mess right there. And what the woman said to me was, Mrs. Abbott, this can be a lot of different things. This could mean a lot of different things. But the next thing we need to do is have her hearing evaluated. I think we're looking at a hearing issue, but it could be caused by lots of different things. The next thing we need to set up is a hearing assessment with a pediatric audiologist. And so they did that. And it was very shortly after that that it was determined that we were definitely looking at a hearing loss. Next slide. So if we can get, I don't know if we're at the slide with lots of different words on it. Okay. So as you can imagine, our planet came off of its axis. Everything that we had been doing as a family up until that point completely changed overnight. So Bridie had the test in the booth, the behavioral testing, and then that was followed by a sedated ABR to see how accurate was her test in the booth to what the ABR would show. And the good news was they were identical, which showed that she was at an early age a pretty good tester in a booth. But the glossary of terms that we had to learn overnight was obscene. And the questions that we had were things like, how did this happen? When did this happen? What does this mean? Progressive, you keep using that word. What is that? What does progressive mean? Do I need to learn ASL? Or what's a cochlea? What's a cochlear implant? What are hearing aids? All of these terms that were being discussed were all new to us, and we felt very pressured to understand this as quickly as possible so that we could make decisions as quickly as possible. And that pressure was not coming from anywhere but within ourselves. Next slide. So every family that goes through this experience, and I'm sure that there are families that are either watching this now live or will later on when it's rebroadcast, every family goes through this process in terms of the emotional journey differently. We share some things in common, but ultimately the emotional journey of families is unique to every family and unique to every family member. So for me personally, my emotional journey can best be described in those early days as a combination of panic and guilt. Panic and guilt. Panic in how on earth are we going to do this? What does this mean? What do I need to learn? What decisions need to be made right now? And guilt in thinking that how could I as her mother have not noticed this? She had a moderate sloping to severe hearing loss in both ears. How did I not notice this? Guilt in thinking at the time that it was because of some of the decisions that we made on the day of her birth on how to bring her into the world and how that didn't really go as planned. There was a lot of panic and guilt that was suddenly a constant backpack on my shoulders, on my husband's shoulders. And we carried that, and that influenced a lot of our decisions and how we moved through the next several months. Next slide. So hopefully at this point you can see a picture of Bridie with a smile on her face and blonde hair. Are we there? Is that what we see? Okay. So I'm very excited about this picture because this picture was taken the first day that she received hearing aids. So this was hearing aid day. And you can notice there are some crumbs on her face. And so one of the things that we started on that day and we continued for several years was that whenever she got new molds, and she always wanted color, swirls, glitter, whatever you can throw in there she wanted, we would get color coordinated cupcakes to celebrate. And that was really the point where we decided we have to embrace this with joy. Even if it's just kind of fake it till you make it, we have to embrace this with joy because that is going to lead the way for us. Her family members, my parents, my sister, my brother, our neighbors were stunned. Her teachers stunned to hear that Bridie had lost her hearing and that no one had noticed. We all of us, the community that had surrounded her prior to this, we all felt a tinge of guilt for not noticing. But they too decided, nope, we're going to take this with joy. We're going to celebrate the gift of sound. We're going to celebrate the gift of technology, the fact that we found this. And that really led us into the next several years. Next slide. So one of the things that I think we all know is that just because a child has access to sound does not solve the problem, right? There's more to be done. There's more work to be done. And so we spent a lot of time investing time with early intervention and then also with early childhood special education. So one of the things that we had to do with Bridie that's unique to our story was she had invented a language all her own. She had invented a language that she could speak fluently and that she understood fluently. We had to simultaneously have her unlearn that language and relearn oral English at the same time. And we dove into that pool like our lives depended on it. She was 2.5 at the time that she was diagnosed. So we were kind of coming up at the end of the age for access to early intervention services, where we would then need to transition over to the school system. And we worked really hard with both of them to make sure that she's had as much therapy as we could possibly get for her. Early intervention was easy. Transitioning to the school system was a little bit harder because she's a May birthday. And they really weren't eager to start her in May or June. They wanted to wait till September. So we had to fight to get her summer services. And we did win that fight. The other thing that happened during this time, I think I mentioned earlier that her older sister was a natural born leader. We never told Mary Claire, you know, this is how we're going to communicate with her. These are the things we're going to be doing. She came to many of our appointments and she saw firsthand kind of how we were changing, how we were talking to her and working with her and playing with her. And she was just like, oh, is this the new way? Okay. And so Mary Claire was demonstrating all of the things, the Ling 6 sounds that we were doing every day. Mary Claire was doing those with us. She was inventing her own version of Ling 6 sounds. And when we would read to her, even the positioning of where we would read or how we would play, Mary Claire just started doing that. So I do think that a good portion of her success is because of the sibling involvement that just naturally occurred in our home. The goal at the time was to have Bridie be kindergarten ready, because when we first started, they kind of said she might not be. But I have good news. Next slide. So here, are we looking at Connexin 26? This was around the time, I think we're looking at Connexin 26. This was around the time that we did genetic testing and found out that it was Connexin 26 that caused her hearing loss and not part of her birth journey. And so that helped to alleviate some of the guilt that we had been carrying, but we carried that for about a year of not knowing what it was. There's a question I'd love to answer. It says, you mentioned you needed more therapy towards the end of her coverage under Eddie. What was the issue and what might have helped your daughter family get what you needed for your daughter? Yeah, so when Bridie, so we found, all of this started in February and her birthday was in May. And so we jumped right into early intervention right as they suspected hearing loss. They assumed hearing loss and just started right away with those services before she had hearing aids before. And so she had speech therapy and what I would call not quite auditory verbal therapy, but very close to it through the early intervention system. And then when we migrated to the school system and we successfully got summer services for her, and then the following fall services 3 times a week, it was a mixture of speech therapy and auditory verbal therapy. And I remember at the time as a parent not understanding the difference between the two. Like, really, I don't understand what, something like Tuesdays and Thursdays are speech therapy and Wednesdays are auditory verbal therapy. And and they were different people. And I was just like, I don't understand. Why is this not all one thing? And it really was never really explained to me, or maybe it was and I didn't understand it. But ultimately, when she transitioned from an IFSP to an IEP, her ability to, again, hear and process that information through her ears and then to understand it and use it for oral language. They recognize that as a big gap, that she could recite things, but her ability to actually understand them, then retain them and get them back out, that was a gap for her. So auditory verbal therapy formally started when she was 3 and she was in summer school. So going to the slide that says Bridie was kindergarten ready, which I think is the next one. So Bridie was kindergarten ready. We got her kindergarten ready. Did she struggle with reading? Yes. Did she struggle with math? Yes. Do I think that has anything to do with her hearing loss? I don't know. You know, some kids struggle with reading and with math in kindergarten and some don't. And I was grateful for kindergarten teachers that were very eager to work with her. One of the wild things that they did, which I thought was hilarious, was Bridie came home with a piece of PVC pipe, white PVC pipe, with like this. And she brought it into her room. And whenever I would go in there and she was reading or whatever, she was like a phone. And I was like, what are you doing? And she's like, this is how I read. And so I asked, like, what is this? And so sure enough, I don't know who, whether it was the auditory verbal therapist that was in the school that worked with her or her kindergarten teacher, but somebody came up with this idea of reading with a reading with a piece of PVC pipe. And she loved doing it. So I was like, whatever. But she was kindergarten ready, and she had an IEP and used an FM system in kindergarten and first grade. And then it was as we were kind of moving past first grade that she had met all of the developmental milestones, and I was told she no longer needed an IEP and she qualified for a 504 plan, and she would still have the FM system and all of that. And I realize now that I should have fought to keep that IEP a bit longer, because we ended up at the end of middle school going back to an IEP. You know, there's lots of lessons learned there that you just don't know as a parent who's navigating this for the first time. But ultimately, our goal for having her start kindergarten ready was successful. So next slide. I am happy to report that Bridie is a thriving 16-year-old with a car that she paid for herself. She has an after-school job. She is an acolyte in church. She's hormonal and boy crazy right now. Let's see what else. She's very, very 16. She's mainstream. She has a small but fierce group of friends. She's a big fan of the Aci Loft program, which she went through. I think it was supposed to be in person and they had to do it virtually. So she missed out on going to Washington, D.C. But she is loud and proud. She's thrilled to be who she is. She still wears bright colors at 16 and a half years old. She wears her hair up in a bun, a messy bun, show them off. She loves working with little kids who have hearing loss, and she does so every summer through a program at VCU. And she loves to have the little kids, crawling all over her and looking at her stuff. And she wouldn't change a thing about herself. And I think that started with the cupcakes. And I think it started with us saying, nope, we're going to go big or go home. We're going to celebrate the joy in this, because there is a lot of joy. So next slide. And I'm going to go through these next ones fairly quickly. So parent leaders start at home. One of the things that I know now that I did not know then is that we as family members start advocating at home, and we hone that skill at home. And then some of us, but not all of us, at some point say, you know what, I think I can be helpful for other people. I think I can support other families and help them during their journey. And so we go to the next bubble. And then some of us, after we become really comfortable talking with other families and supporting them in the decisions that they're making for their children with hearing loss, some of us say, you know what, I want to do something else. I want to make a difference in a bigger way. I want to be more of an advocate. I want to change the system for the benefit, not of my family, but of the next generation of families. And so for me, those things happened at different time frames, right? I started in 2008 with my own family. It wasn't until 8 years later in 2016 that I said, you know what, I think I can be helpful to some other people. And then shortly after that, realizing I have a voice and people want to hear it. So next slide. So in 2016, I raised my hand and offered to help the Family to Family Network of Virginia through the Center for Family Involvement. They have a 136 family educator program, and we are contracted through the Department of Health EDI program to connect with the families of the relatively newly diagnosed with hearing loss and to support those families in helping determine what they think is best for their child. I also became very active as a parent champion for our state EDI program. I encourage all families to get involved in that. There's so much to learn about what's going on, and they're eager to hear the parent perspective. And so it was through that involvement that I started to learn things I never knew and I should have known all along. Next slide. So I learned that approximately 3 out of 1,000 children are born with some degree of hearing loss. And I think that's a common thing. I didn't know that at the time. I also learned that incidence of hearing loss doubles between birth and school age. And the way I interpret that means that just as many children lose their hearing or have a change in hearing status after birth as those that are identified at birth, but we don't talk about them. And that was my experience. That was my child. I also learned that children who fall in that category of postnatal hearing loss, frequently the time of onset to the time of identification is much longer. They're harder to find than those that are automatically screened in a hospital setting. And as a result, we see those children with developmental delays that could have been prevented had we found them sooner. And the last thing, and this is what really still grabs my attention, is that the CDC estimates nearly 15% of students in the United States between the ages of 6 and 19 have permanent hearing loss enough to impact them academically. Where are these children? And this knowledge is really what brought me, I think, from going from that second circle of, I think I can be helpful one-on-one with families, to no. I need to talk bigger. I need to call attention to my family's experience. Next slide. The other thing I learned about were risk factors. These come from the JCIH list of most common risk factors of postnatal hearing loss, but it's not all of them. Now, clearly, the Abbott family, it was genetics. So it was a risk factor, but it's what I call an unknown risk factor. My child had a risk factor, but I didn't know about it. How many children with postnatal hearing loss or late onset hearing loss or acquired hearing loss, there's so many different terms for it, how many of them have unknown risk factors? I think we need to be talking more about this. So next slide. So this is really where I started to feel like I had enough information. I felt educated enough as a parent to really start in advocacy work. And people here in Virginia knew me as an active person in a couple of different things. And they said, how do you feel about talking in front of the General Assembly? And I was like, what is that? Like, what would that entail? What does that mean, really? And so I had no training to do it. I had no experience to do it. I was just asked, would you be willing to share what you know? And I was surprised that the legislators really wanted to hear from families. And so every now and then I would go, and most often I would go with Bridie. And I would say, Bridie, hey, you want to do this with me? You want to share your truth? And she's like, yeah. So we started doing this together, her and I. And I even brought my oldest child at one point to bring the sibling perspective in. So we've been down to the General Assembly a couple of times. And then, next slide, COVID happens. COVID happens and catches us all off guard. And my advocacy work shifted. I would say it was around month 6 or 7 where we really didn't feel like we had an end in sight. And I started to remember how my child was first identified that someone noticed her in a preschool classroom and noticed that her language was not progressing. And instead of saying, oh, it's because of this, or oh, it's because of that, they said, we need to talk to the parents about this. And then we as the parents took action with what people were sharing with us. But what's going to happen during COVID? And I really started to panic on behalf of those children, on behalf of those families that were experiencing something radically different than what we had. And that is where the idea of sharing our story and starting a real movement about late onset hearing loss awareness began. It began as a result of COVID. Next slide. So this is where late onset hearing loss awareness campaign was born. It was a natural progression, right? And COVID was ultimately the last straw for me. And I said, we can't ignore, we can't table these kids anymore. We need to focus on them because there are just as many, if not more of them. And we need to talk about them more. So go to, I think it was September of 2020. And I reached out to Justin Osmond, who is CEO of the Olive Osmond Hearing Fund. And he is the nephew of Donnie and Marie Osmond and son of the patriarch, Merrill Osmond. And I had connected with him like 4 years before because a friend of mine sent me a book that he had signed for Bridie and he signed it. And I said, you do not remember me, but I sent you an email and you responded. And he was like, yeah, I couldn't believe it. He responded, was like, hi, yeah, I remember you. I said, I have this crazy idea. I'm going to publish our story. I'm going to write a children's book and I'm going to publish it. And it's about late onset hearing loss and about the language issues that it created and the emotional journey that our family experienced. But more importantly, I want to start a campaign. I want to start something called Late Onset Hearing Loss Awareness Week. And I am just Val Abbott and nobody knows who I am, but they know you and your family. And the other thing I knew about him was that he was also late identified at the same age as Bridie. So I knew I would have a possible hook and he took it and he said, yes, let's do this together. And he said, I don't know how to start a campaign like this. I don't know either. But he said, take my platform, use it for what you need. Yes, I say yes to everything. And so we soft launched Late Onset Hearing Loss Awareness Week last May in 2021. And it started to get a little bit of traction. And we said, let's try and continue this and see if we can get other people to want seats on the plane. And so he and I refer to Late Onset Hearing Loss Awareness Week as the plane. Next slide. So the objective of the campaign is to emphasize the importance of ongoing hearing health monitoring for all children, but especially children with specific risk factors and those who are demonstrating developmental delays, with the goal being of improving postnatal hearing loss identification rates and reducing the time between onset and identification. And the idea being that if we can do that, then more children will be super kindergarten ready and will have the same hope and opportunities that the children who are identified at birth will have. Next slide. I know I'm talking like the New Yorker that I am. So here's an example of the type of resource that we are hoping groups will create. This is just an example. It's a rack card. On one side, it highlights the most common signs of a change in hearing status in simple language that parents and family members can understand. On the other side, it talks about the risk factors. What we are hoping is that groups, agencies, organizations are inspired to create their own resources that focus on postnatal hearing loss and get them out to their groups that they work with. And this is just one example of that. Next slide. So the next thing that happened after May was in June, our family didn't have any summer plans. And I had just written a book and had just launched a grassroots effort. And so we packed up the family van, literally, and we headed from Virginia up to Long Island, where I'm from, and my children had never been. And I was like, well, let's just see what we can do. So the four of us for a month went around. We went from Long Island to Connecticut to New Jersey to Maryland and Delaware to back to Virginia to Washington, D.C. We kind of did that little trek, and we met with as many groups of people that would meet with us. And I was surprised at just how many people were eager to talk about this. And that told me, I think we're onto something. I think the temperature is right to be focused on late onset hearing loss awareness. And then NCHAM grabbed it, the National Center for Hearing Assessment and Management, Carl White. He reached out and said, we have to take this on a national level. Every state and U.S. territory needs to focus on this in May of 2022. Next slide. So I invite all of you that are seeing this either live or later on to please join the movement, right? This plane has seats for all, and anybody can fly it, and it doesn't take a lot. It just means that every year we need to be focused on these kids and focused on identifying more children with postnatal hearing loss. Next slide. So on behalf of my family, the Abbott family, thank you. Thank you for listening to our story and for hopefully being inspired to talk about late onset hearing loss with the networks that you're connected to, and for perhaps doing something in your community. And that is my presentation. So I hope I didn't go over. I've noticed that my clock here is different than this one, so I apologize. And that's my presentation. So how can if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for that wonderful presentation. As a parent of two daughters who were born profoundly deaf, this is an aspect I never really considered or focused on, but it's equally as important. We'll now take questions. Please remember to submit them via the chat feature.
And I'll mention that my computer is not being my friend today, so I can't see the chat. So if someone can tell me if there are any questions, that would be great.
I'll read this first question. Have you thought about working with ASHA's May is Better Hearing and Speech Month to promote your campaign?
Yes. So when Dr. Carl White reached out to me and said, you and I need to talk, he then connected me with some writers on his team who have submitted an article to the ASHA National Magazine. And I'm hoping that that will be published sometime in the spring. So we've connected in that way, but if anybody has anyone specific they would like me to reach out to, I am ValerieJamesAbbott@gmail.com. It does not get any easier than that.
Does anyone else have any questions? Here's one. Got a buddy with a 3-year-old grandson that still is not talking so others can understand him, talks his own language that only his parents can understand. He passed early hearing screening, but I keep telling them they need to get a recheck. So much about Bridie's story parallels his development. So thank you so much. I will rattle their chains again.
Yes, I am of the mindset, when in doubt, check it out. And ultimately what one of the main things, the slogan for the campaign is take notice, take action, right? If you notice something, do something. And so instead of going from a culture of, oh, I noticed something, but they'll grow out of it, or, oh, I noticed, oh, they're a slow talker, or whatever, is instead of doing the let's wait and see, is if you see something that concerns you and you ask the question, is there any chance that this could be connected to hearing loss? If the answer is maybe, have the hearing screening done, have a formal official hearing evaluation done by a pediatric audiologist. If we all did that, we would find these kids sooner.
And can you provide some tips for parents who want to start advocating beyond their own household?
Yes. So it depends on what they're interested in doing. You know, is it legislatively? Is it, there's so many different ways to advocate. One of them is helping, like, for example, when I work with families one-on-one, and I'm not telling them, I'm going to teach you how to advocate. I never say that because that sounds kind of cheesy. But if I'm talking with them and they're saying my provider won't listen to me or whatever the issue is I'll say, tell me more about that. And we'll have that conversation. They may be making a choice that is radically different than one that I would make. But that's not what I'm there to do. I'm there to listen to them and to help them figure out what words do I need to say so that you hear me? Or what phrases do I need to say to get past you to what I want to do? And so advocacy takes a lot of different shapes, and ultimately it's honing a skill, it's sharpening the saw. And so what I've found is when I first worked with parents on helping them to develop their advocacy skills and basically giving them permission to be an advocate. Sometimes that's what they need is, yes, that's exactly what you should say. Say it. It can take a lot of different shapes and forms. So there isn't just one way. But if there's anyone who wants to reach out to me individually to chat about some ideas, I'm happy to talk with people.
Where can people go to learn more about Late Onset Awareness Week and find the resources? What do you hope other organizations will be able to do with those resources?
Yes. So the Olive Osmond Hearing Fund, which is hearingfund.org, they have a separate page specifically for late onset hearing loss awareness. And there's a bunch of different information there. So there aren't a ton of resources available yet, right? I mean, it's not like I have a team of people and a budget. I have a team of like me and a budget of nothing like this. So the hope is that individuals will create their own resources and that we will share them. So this March, I'll be doing a all-day instructional session at the Eddie conference with their keynote speaker, Dr. Dylan Chan. And we will be doing some training on late onset hearing loss awareness week, how to do something in your community on an annual basis. And the hope is that at the end of this first year, that we can ask people to come back together and share what they've done, if they've created a resource, and for us to give each other permission to steal from each other. And I know that's very different than many other ways but the idea of let's leverage each other's creativity. And if you know something and this is working, let's tell the world about it.
Okay, and somebody else has written that every state's Eddie program has a chapter champion through the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our pediatricians receive guidance from AAP on the importance of prompt referral to an audiologist for children with risk indicators for late onset hearing loss. But I think it would be super helpful for Ms. Abbott and the folks involved in this initiative to make the connections to their state's chapter champion to further inspire their pediatric peers to be mindful of pediatric late onset hearing loss. Sharing your personal stories would be very meaningful for the pediatric community for sure.
I totally agree. I really, really do. And pediatricians are amazing human beings who are so skilled at what they do, but they're not experts in certain things. And acquired hearing loss after birth is one of those things that they know some about. So yes, that is on the horizon. Just like any grassroots effort, we kind of have to pick and choose our audiences. And so this year, pediatricians is not on the list, but it is on the big list for sure.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more. You spoke about the advocacy bubble, which starts at home. Could you speak about how what you did there helped Bridie develop her own advocacy skills?
Yes, so Bridie was involved in the IEP process from very, very young, She knew we were talking about her and about her hearing aids and about her FM system and about, accessibility in the classroom. And so she was part of the process from the very beginning. No one told us to do that, but it just seemed like the right thing to do. And then as she got older, she would stay for more of the meetings. We would talk to her more about it, hey, what are your thoughts on this? And then, and it just really each year shifted to where it was her. And so we started with an IEP, then we went to a 504 plan, and then shifted back to an IEP. But even with the 504 plan, one of the things that was in there was that before the first day of school, she got to have a sit down meeting with us to meet with her teachers. And then in middle school, it was with all of her teachers to talk about herself, to say, this is it in a nutshell. Like, my mother's going to give you this thing, but in my words, this is what's going on. This is what I like. This is what I don't. She would shift it. So like this last year, it was pre-COVID, first year of high school, when she met with all of her teachers. And of course, they were really not very excited to be taken out of their classroom, the week before school so they could meet this one student. And she's like, so here's the thing, I use an FM system. If you could just pretend to like it, you can just pretend. Like, she wasn't even, so we have been working with her on advocacy in small steps without a guide. And one of the things that we did that was hard for me was there came a point where, when I was writing kind of the summary for the teachers that I would give to them, she said, I don't want you saying that anymore, that piece. I don't remember what it was. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, I don't like that. I don't want you to include that part. And so there comes a point as a parent where you realize you're going to disagree with your child, but ultimately they are making decisions for themselves. And this is the first step towards, not the first step, but a step towards self-advocacy. So I wouldn't say she's an expert in it, or any of us, but she's damn good for a 16-year-old.
All right. Well, thank you, Valerie, and thank you everyone for attending our first Tuesday talk. You can visit our website to register for upcoming dates. The link is in the chat. It's the second to last comment. Just a brief summary of what's next. Tuesday, February 15th, Understanding Your Child's CI Programming Session with Terry Zwollen, PhD, Director of Audiology at Hearing First. Tuesday, March 15th, Rally Caps and the Importance of CI Representation with Jody Michelle Cutler, author and filmmaker. And Tuesday, April 19th, Understanding an Adult's CI Programming Session, Meredith Holcomb, AUD, Associate Professor, Director, Hearing Implant Program, Associate Professor, University of Miami, Miller School of Medicine.
Wonderful. Thank you again so very much for sharing your experience with everyone. And I'm sure lots of people will reach out to you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This ends our presentation. Bye-bye.